Hi, this is Jackson Doughart from the Telegraph-Journal. I'm joined today by Adam Huras, one of our political reporters, to talk about New Brunswick's provincial election and the ridings to watch. Adam, why don't we start with your take on where we stand right now? How close do you think this election is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, everyone I talk to, is quick to say that this is going to be close, and that it could come down to, how who gets the majority of 10 or 12 ridings. I mean, at the same time, if early indications are we don't see some key holds or some key steals, there's an opportunity there for either the progressive conservatives or liberals to form government. So like what I've kind of tried to do here is look at the ridings that will decide the election. That if you win enough of them, you can win the entire race. So I mean, I don't talk about the two Fredericton South ridings because say if Susan Holt or David Kuhn lose their seat there, there's obviously not a very good chance of those two parties doing well on election night. So I do think though there are several other ridings across the province that will be needed if to form a government.
Just perhaps for the benefit of our audience who may be outside of New Brunswick or maybe who, don't follow politics quite as closely, could you talk about the importance of language to politics in New Brunswick and, really just how starkly different those different parts of the province are when it comes to electoral outcomes?
For sure. We've kind of slowly, after the last few election campaigns, moved to a degree where the majority of Anglophone ridings, those who have, significant Anglophone populations, tend to lean towards the progressive conservatives, whereas the liberals hold nearly all of the Francophone ridings. So there's currently 16 of 49 ridings in the province that have a majority Francophone base. They're all held, every single one of them, by the liberals. And so, that trend looks to continue, but it, is key maybe in Moncton where you've got we have ridings with Francophone populations that are not 50%, but in the 30 percentile where the Tories do have a couple of seats that could be at risk now.
In province-wide, how many seats do we think really are in play?
I would say, I'm looking at a good 10 to 12 that I think are key. I mean, it could be as many as 15, 16. And in terms of an election, right, a tide turns and things can turn quickly. But yeah, I mean, in a close race, this will be down to 10 or so.
And just a reminder to the readers that New Brunswick is a 49-seat legislature, so 25 seats would get you a majority government. Let's talk about Moncton now. So why do you think Moncton in particular is so important, given where things were heading into the election and where you think things might shake out?
Yeah, so 4 years ago, Blaine Higgs and his progressive conservatives stole two Moncton ridings, Moncton South and Moncton East, from the Kevin Vickers-led Liberals. Those were seats that he flipped by less than 800 votes. And there were seats that Brian Gallant won in 2014. And then again in 2018, even when Higgs formed the government. So they're not bellwether seats, but they're ones that are fresh Higgs wins that got him a majority government last time around or contributed to it. What's kind of changed since then is several things. In Moncton East, they elected some Daniel Alain last time around, and that he was the only Francophone in the cabinet for a while. He's now not reoffering, and so that kind of puts that riding in play because of that. Also, it's something that's significant here that you need to consider is that there was an electoral boundary redraw not too long ago, and so a lot of the ridings look slightly different. If you actually transpose the poll by poll from 2020 onto Moncton East currently, that seat would already be Liberal. So there's a big uphill battle for the Tories in that riding now. The same kind of thing in Moncton South. It's a riding that was narrowly won, and it has a Francophone population of about 24%, which makes it, I think, the 18th or 19th riding in terms of Francophone votership. So it's one of those that if the trend is towards more Francophones voting as a bloc towards the Liberals or the Greens, that it puts that riding in doubt. Something that indicates that that's a big possibility in the area is there was a Dieppe by-election about a year and a half ago. The Tories got 8% of that vote. And I know by-elections usually see the government not do that well in them because you're not forming a government, you're kind of potentially protesting the government or sending them a signal that they need to do something else. But 8% is historically low. The Tories have not had that low of a percentage in a single riding race since I think it's about 3 decades now. Over 400 races have gone by. It was a record low, and I think internally it shook the Progressive Conservatives, even though it was a by-election, to the point where, yeah, there's some worrisome signs in Moncton. I mean, it could expand. The Tories also hold Moncton Northwest, and that's held by Ernie Steeves, the finance minister. That riding has a decent rural component as well, but in the scheme of things, you've seen recent polling and you look at regional polling breakdowns, and Susan Holt is polling quite high in the Moncton region. So there's a good opportunity for some steals.
What about St. John and Fredericton? So right now, St. John is blue across the board, and the Conservatives in the last election, though they don't have all of those seats now, did well in Fredericton too. Has the dynamic changed in either of those cities, or are they at least more in play than they were before?
The neat outcome, or the interesting outcome to watch in St. John, is what happens to those long-time incumbents who kind of jumped ship from the Blaine Higgs Progressive Conservatives in the last little while. An interesting point about this, so in 2020, the PCs elected 27 MLAs. 12 of them aren't reoffering. So you've lost a lot of that incumbency, talent, but then also electability, where, we've read studies, and there's been a lot of work done on the power of an incumbent and what it means in terms of being re-election. There's a better chance of doing that in ridings like St. John, Portland Simons, St. John Harbor. You've lost Trevor Holder there. It's been 25 years of Trevor Holder winning that riding. So it's hard to separate what is Tory base there and what is Trevor Holder support. So it kind of opens the door to potentially something new. Similar Arlene Dunn and St. John Harbor, I think that's open. Even Dorothy Shepherd's riding Lancaster there. She's not reoffering. So there's an opportunity for other parties to come in there and steal seats. It's still a very blue region. I mean, Southern New Brunswick still pulls strongly for the Progressive Conservatives, but in the city itself, something like St. John Harbor has flipped again and again and again. I think we were in 2014 and in 2018, I think at both times it was solved by under 50 votes. I think it was 8 votes, I believe, in 2014. So there's a chance there, and I think opposition parties see it.
It seems like the theme here is we're looking at places where, the Tories, could lose seats. Of course, they're the incumbent government, so that makes some sense. But do you think there's any place in particular where they have an opportunity to make gains that they don't have now?
It's tough because, they're like you said, they're the incumbent. They had 27 seats last time around. But, I think they are polling quite well in the Fredericton region. I don't know if that translates, but I could see them, holding something like Fredericton North, which was another big steal of theirs last time around. Jill Green won that riding in 2020. It was held by Stephen Horseman before that in 2018. So, there's a significant opportunity there to, win these seats, which I feel if you get enough of them, you will continue to, you'll form government, either a minority and a majority if you get a large number of them. Again, still strong in southern New Brunswick. And then, then you start looking at things like Carleton, Victoria. Another riding that looks like it could be in play. Margaret Johnson won there by under 400 votes last time around, and that was against Andrew Harvey, who was a strong competitor. The thing is, though, is that Margaret Johnson lives in the southern part of the riding in Florenceville, Bristol, and where she won most of her polls. The Liberals have decided to pick a candidate who's a member of the Tulloch First Nation Band Council. And so I started looking at poll by poll there because I thought, wow, it's a good opportunity for the Liberals to potentially gain some votes in a part of the riding that, maybe was, didn't see that support. But then when I looked at the poll by poll, the Liberals did amazingly well on the Tulloch First Nation last time around. Margaret Johnson got 3 votes over 3 polling stations in that riding, and where the Liberals had something, Andrew Harvey had something like 160 of the votes there. So it's hard to see where they'll, in that riding, gain enough votes to fit, to kind of like fill that spread of about 400. So yeah, I think it's another riding where the Progressive Conservatives feel they can hold. Miramichi East is another one of those ridings. I have a hard time now ever betting against Michelle Conroy. I thought Bill Fraser would not handily, but win that race in 2018. He was kind of the incumbent, beloved news infrastructure minister at the time too, and had brought a lot of money for the to Miramichi, and Michelle Conroy took him down, and then in 2020 she defeated Kevin Vickers in that riding.
And she was with the People's Alliance then, of course, right now with Tory.
Right. And so, you've got to factor that in. Does she take those votes with her and then add that to the Tories? That's significant. The other part of this is now she's in Miramichi East because of the redraw of the region. She's now in a part of Miramichi that has typically voted a little more liberal in the past. It's potentially the east side of Miramichi. There's a lot of, poll by poll shows some liberal support in recent elections. But again, it's hard to say she won't win because of just her ability to get reelected in difficult circumstances.
So also staying in eastern New Brunswick, Kent North being a place that's currently held by the Greens, but a strong Liberal candidate, is that somewhere that you think it's possible to see a Liberal gain where it's currently a Green riding?
I think this riding really matters because if this is a close race and it comes down and a minority government is formed, the Greens need at least a couple seats, maybe more than that, to have the balance of power and maybe exercise, some policy change in the provincial legislature. They can't do that if they go down to 2 seats or even 1 seat. So Kevin Arsenault winning that is important, by all accounts. And I think anyone you talk to would say he's a strong MLA, a strong constituent MLA, well known in the riding. He has an interesting style that I think people like. But then the Liberals pick a good candidate and get an MP in Pat Finnegan, known as Mr. Tomato, another farmer in the area, to run. Now, Pat was elected in 2014 in that 2015 in the big federal Liberal wave, but then decided not to reoffer recently, and that opened the door to Jake Stewart jumping from provincial politics to federal politics and winning there. He left on his own fruition. Frankly, the travel back and forth to Ottawa was a lot. He had his business at home, and he just, he did what he thought he wanted to do and now returned. So it's interesting to see him come back into politics because he was also another well-liked constituency MP. So, I don't know how, I'm not saying that this is winnable, for sure for the Liberals. I think Kevin Arsenault is a strong competitor, but I do think, and when I'm talking to some of the people in this riding, I think that Kevin will be in a little bit more difficult of a spot than he would have been otherwise. And yeah, so I mean, before he won the riding, I guess in 2020 by about 1,000 votes, he could be a little bit closer this time. If the Liberals are going to make a big push and potentially form a majority government, this could be a riding in play.
Adam, let's shift our focus to southern New Brunswick, where in a couple of ridings, the Liberals are running former progressive conservative office holders under their own banner. What can you tell us about the Hampton and Sussex ridings?
Yeah, for sure. So Hampton, Funny St. Martin's, there's nothing in the data that shows this should be close. It's a progressive conservative riding. You need to go back to something like 1995 and Georgie Day to find when a Liberal last won. So, on its face, this should be safe as safe. But, there was so Gary Crossman was the MLA for the area, and he had some difficulties with, who the party selected to be his replacement. And so that's kind of led to him kind of disavowing the progressive conservatives here and deciding to back now the Liberal candidate, who is John Herron. John Herron is a former progressive conservative MP. So this dates back to prior to the Canadian Alliance and merger with the Progressive Conservatives in Ottawa to become the Conservative Party of Canada. John had won the riding there as a progressive conservative. So he's well known. He's from Hampton. He coaches a lot of track and is well known in a lot of areas. A true local candidate, but also a red Tory, someone who is fiscally conservative but has socially liberal values, and that has lended itself to this debate of Higgs and his decision of his candidate there and a Christian conservative MLA to run. And it just brings in play whether or not the progressive conservative base would be willing to support a progressive conservative now running as a Liberal. All polls would tell you that it's still a strong Tory seat, but there's something there, and it's an interesting riding to watch. The other one you want to talk about, I think, is Sussex, correct?
Yeah. It sounds like you're a little more skeptical that one's in play.
Yeah, I mean, so Sussex, Three Rivers, and we know, so Tammy Scott Wallace is a former Brunswick News employee, and I sat beside her in the legislature for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and I know her well. She's a very strong candidate. It's a very Tory area. Now, she took the reins of that riding from Bruce Northrup, who had that seat dating all the way back to 2006. And so he had it for 12 years, right? He was winning by margins of 2,000 votes at the end. I think he had a 3,000 vote margin at one point. I know Tammy won last time around by 3,000 votes, which in itself is a huge hill to climb for any other party. The other point in this riding is that the runner-up both in the last two races, so one with Tammy and one with Bruce, was the People's Alliance. So the People's Alliance won 1,000 votes or so each of those times in that riding. And so the Liberals were a distant third. And so if you expect some of that People's Alliance vote to now move itself to the Progressive Conservatives, and I've seen polling that shows even some of that Progressive Conservative or some of that People's Alliance vote moves to Greens, and there is a little bit being eaten up by the Liberals as well. But if the majority of it, which is expected, would move to the Tories, even if Bruce Northrup and his long history in the riding sways some, it's difficult to see if it's enough to overcome a strong progressive conservative base. And then Tammy Scott Wallace, who's well known, by herself in the riding as well.
So last question, Adam, just to finish up here, where do you think in the province each of the three parties is most vulnerable to losing seats they already have?
So yeah, good question. I mean, for the progressive conservatives, I think it's definitely Moncton. Moncton, again, it's this language issue, and there are two steals there that were fresh and by smaller margins. The Liberals, I would say, I think they'd likely be most concerned about the Fredericton area. I mean, Fredericton North is a riding that I think they need to steal back likely in order to have the numbers to form a government. It's difficult. Jill Green did well there, and she's the incumbent. And Susan Holt's in a race herself in Fredericton South, and while the Tories are polling well in the area, the Greens, I mean, they've got Kuhn in the Fredericton South region, which I don't think will be a problem. We talked about Kevin Arsenault, and then they also have the Memram Cook area riding. I think those are fairly safe. Where they expand, though, is likely the question. They're polling really well in Moncton as well, and when you look at the underlying regional stats, so they could see a breakthrough there. Fredericton as well is maybe a riding. Maybe they could play a role in Fredericton North as well. But yeah, there's a few opportunities, but I don't see any like slam dunk gain for them so far. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
All right. Thanks for doing this, Adam. And obviously, everyone, for more of our coverage of the election, please visit tj.news. We'll talk soon.